In my previous video, I reviewed Swamp Thing: The Bronze Age, Volume 3, and if you missed that video, I'll link to it in the description down below. But in that video, I talked about how this collection of Swamp Thing comics was tied up with the 1982 movie of the Swamp Thing. Specifically, the whole reason DC Comics revived the Swamp Thing in 1982 was largely due to the movie. And they did not shy away from the tie-ins. So the second issue has a cover which references the movie, and then the annual from that year is an adaptation of the movie. And because I read this comic, I read that adaptation of this movie that DC put out. Now, as I said in my review of the Swamp Thing: The Bronze Age, Volume 3, I never saw any of the Swamp Thing media before. The 1982 movie, I was 4 when it came out. I don't remember it at all. I don't remember anyone talking about it. Now, granted, I did grow up in a very sheltered, conservative environment, so I wasn't exposed to a lot of this stuff. But, according to the internet and Wikipedia, the 1982 movie did not do very well in the box office. Apparently it was a bit of a box office bomb. Well, maybe bomb is the wrong word, but not a success. I say bomb is the wrong word because apparently it was made on the cheap. So I think you would only use bomb for something that was very expensive and then did poorly, right? Anyways. Did not do well in the box office, but did very well in home video in the 80s. Enough so that they made a sequel in 1989, which I forget the name of it. I think it was called Return of the Swamp Thing. Rosa, Daddy's filming a video. Leo, Daddy's filming a video. It's time for you to go to bed.
It's your butt and the room, the Doraemon book, the new book.
Oh, yeah, the Doraemon book is not in here. Okay. They were supposed to have gone to bed a half hour ago. It's a little bit difficult filming videos sometimes. Anyways, the Return of the Swamp Thing, I do actually remember when that came out in 1989. I never saw it, but I remember it hitting theaters. I remember reading the reviews of it in the paper, etc. And then the Swamp Thing had a TV show in the 90s, which I may have been vaguely aware of. I don't clearly remember. So anyways, the point being with all of this, I guess I was vaguely aware of the Swamp Thing in the 1980s, but never got around to seeing it. But reading this adaptation of it from the comic book sparked my curiosity. As I was reading through this, there seemed like a lot of action-packed scenes in here. And I got curious. I thought, I wonder how this would actually look on the screen. Like, how did they actually film this? It seems like there's a lot of really amazing scenes here when you read the comic book adaptation. Also, as I was researching this on the internet, I came across a lot of comments from people around my age, I assume, talking about how much nostalgia they had for this movie, how they saw it with their dad originally, how they saw it on TV one night, and how this was the greatest movie ever. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I grew up in a sheltered environment in the 1980s, and I was not exposed to a lot of the pop culture of the 80s, and sometimes get the urge to go back and check out what I missed. So, I checked, and the 1982 version of the Swamp Thing is on YouTube at the moment. I'm not sure it's legally there. I'm not sure how long it will stay up there. But it's there at the moment, and I will link to it in the description down below. You can check it out if you want, and I have watched it. So, here is my review. The movie looks cheap. And not just the Swamp Thing himself, who is just kind of a man in the rubber suit, but just everything about the movie looks cheap. Now, with apologies, I'm not really knowledgeable about films. I'm not like a real film buff. So I'm not able to talk intelligently about what makes a movie look cheap and what makes it not look cheap. I thought maybe I mentioned before that the Swamp Thing had a cable TV show in the 1990s. This was filmed in 1982, but it totally looks like a science fiction cable TV show from the 1990s, like that kind of production value. I think maybe the quality of the film maybe wasn't as good. It looked to me like television quality film. And also, as I was watching it and trying to put my finger on why it looked cheap, I thought maybe there weren't as many cuts. So, instead of having a lot of cuts back and forth between actors' faces, there would just be like a wide shot, and they would shoot the whole thing in that wide shot, which perhaps made it feel a little bit more like television. According to Wikipedia, Wes Craven, the director for this, delivered it with a budget of something like $2 million, $2.5 million, which he was quite proud of having finished during that budget. I actually don't know if that was a lot of money for a movie in 1982 or not, but I'm going to assume that was done on the cheap. Further digging around on on the internet, I believe it's the IMDb website, shows that Wes Craven was complaining about all the people from the Bond company. I don't know what that means. I guess something related to the finances of it, who were constantly making sure he didn't go over budget, and in fact telling him to cut out scenes in the third act to save money. So this was a film that was done to save money, and I think it shows. That being said, though, it's quite watchable. And I think one of the things that makes it really watchable in spite of the low budget is the pacing and the screenplay. So it's a B movie, and it looks like a B movie and it feels like a B movie, and you get the impression that they're setting out deliberately to make a B movie. And in fact, I didn't see this written explicitly anywhere in any of the research I did on the movie, but it seems fairly obvious to me that it's meant to be partly an homage to the creature from Black Lagoon. Again, I didn't see that written anywhere, but I'm sure other people have written it somewhere. In fact, it's so obvious, I'm reluctant to claim any points for noticing it. I mean, you can see right here in the movie poster the creature carrying the woman, just like the creature from the Black Lagoon. So it's very much an homage to those kind of movies. Now, I did watch several of those movies in my youth. Saw The Creature from Black Lagoon sometime in high school, for example. And if you've seen any of those movies, you're aware that their pacing, they can have a lot of pacing problems, right? There's a very kind of boring first act before the monster appears. Once the monster appears, nothing will happen for a while. But this movie is not one of those movies. This movie, right from the beginning, is paced in a very energetic way. And quite a clever screenplay, I thought, in terms of keeping the story moving during the first act while we're getting the origin story for the Swamp Thing. So the Alice Cable arrives. She's the female lead character. She arrives into the swamp. She's getting all this information fed to her, but in a clip that makes it interesting. There's some sort of secret experiment going on. A lot of people are going crazy here in the swamp. There's some sort of spies going on in Washington. There's rumors that this guy named Arcane has found out about the project. So you're immediately introduced into this kind of what appears to be a complex political thriller. I mean, it's not, because they never develop any of those threads. But you get just kind of like a taste of it. While this is going on, there are these soldiers marching through the swamp who ambush this one guy who's connected with the project and kill him with a snake. Oh, by the way, spoilers. I'm spoiling everything. And then they attack the compound, and the whole thing is just moving. Has a lot of plot details just kind of thrown in there. But I don't mean that as a bad thing. I mean as a lot of tidbits to kind of keep you interested. Like, okay, where's the story going? This looks interesting. Looks like there's a lot of stuff being set up here. Oh, okay, the bad guys are attacking. And it keeps that pace going through most of the movie. Even after the swamp thing is created and he's out in the swamps, there's just kind of a constant chase. It slows down maybe a little bit once the Swamp Thing and Alice Cable are captured. And then there's 10 minutes of the movie that are at a slower pace while they're being captured. But then things pick up again. It was a pretty decently paced movie for being on a low budget. I can see why people have a lot of nostalgia for this movie. It is the kind of movie that I wished I would have seen at 10, because this would have been one of the greatest movies ever if you saw it at 10 years old. Alas, that ship has sailed. I'm now viewing this movie from the perspective of middle-aged, in which I can say, entertaining. Fast-paced enough to be entertaining. The Swamp Thing is just kind of a man in a big rubber suit. The comic book adaptation shows, I guess, maybe the ideas they must have had behind this. For example, you can see this here. Swamp Thing reaching out, pulling a guy behind the boat, then bursting through and shattering the boat. And it's the kind of thing that made me think, oh, okay, how are they going to film that? Or, let's see, another thing over here with the Swamp Thing running out and stopping the car, smashing the car to a halt. How they do it really is with editing. For example, the Swamp Thing will reach over to grab a character, one of the bad guys, and then you'll see the character kind of fly through the air in the next shot. So you don't actually see the Swamp Thing lift somebody up and throw them all in one shot. They're doing some editing to have the Swamp Thing grab a character and then have them go flying and create the illusion then that the Swamp Thing has this superhuman strength, even though they don't have the budget for the special effects. But it works. It's edited fast enough. It works well enough, yeah. There's a kid who shows up halfway through for the comic relief. Apparently he was, here he is in the comic book adaptation. According to Wikipedia, he was not a professional actor, and this it was a local that they hired. This allowed them to get around the SAG union rules for child actors a little bit. He's got some good lines, and the actor delivering them, even though he's apparently not a professional, gives it a suitable deadpan. But I don't know if this is just me. the lines are a bit mumbled. They're not articulated as clearly as they could be. I had difficulty hearing the lines, which is a pity because they gave him some great comedic lines. Some of them I feel like I caught because I knew what they were from the comic book. So, they've got the bad guys coming in, and she says, "Don't be afraid, Jude." And he said, "You better say that to someone whose desk you ain't hiding behind." So the idea that she's hiding behind the desk while she's telling him, "Don't be afraid." Or she said, then she said, "All right, you just stay here." And he said, "Took the words right out of my mouth." So those kind of lines are good. I think the delivery was good. The child actor did a good job of deadpanning him. I say child actor, but it somebody who's I think a teenager. But maybe not articulating the lines clearly enough. There's a scene at the end where they are escaping from like this mansion, which is like a castle with a dungeon. There's a fountain here. They jump in and then swim through, and then you get out at the swamp. That is another one of these things which is a lot cooler in the concept than it was in the filming. In the movie, they just jump into the water, and the next scene they're popping up in the swamp. According to IMDb, I think this is one of the scenes that they made Wes Craven cut to save money. There was apparently originally a chase through the flooded tunnels in the original script. By the way, I haven't mentioned it yet, but Wes Craven was the director and screenwriter of this movie. He's most famous for doing some horror movies in the 70s, like Last House on the Left, and I forget the other name of his big ones. And then 2 years later, in 1984, he would get really famous for the Nightmare on Elm Street series, which he started off in 1984, 2 years after this. So this is kind of his transition period, maybe between I don't know, low budget movies and higher budget horror films. What else is there to say about this? Roger Ebert gave it a positive review. I think 3 out of 4 stars. He said yes, that there's a lot of flaws with this movie, but it's also a lot of fun. I believe is a synopsis of his review. There's some interesting philosophical lines thrown into this movie. One of the characters quotes Nietzsche at one point. In the beginning, that was the bad guy, and then at the end, one of the characters says, "Sorry, Bruno, it's every man for himself and God against all," which apparently is, I didn't know this until I looked it up on IMDb, but a line from a Werner Herzog movie. So I guess Wes Craven is showing off his philosophy bona fides by inserting some interesting stuff in there. I'm at the point of this review where I'm just talking about random stuff. Maybe it's time to just finish things up here. I think I've said what I wanted to say. It's entertaining, well-paced, well-written, obviously shot on the cheap, but I think it works well enough. And I'm glad I finally checked out this piece of 80s pop culture. Gradually catching up on my deprived youth.